Mary Stauffer and her 8-year-old daughter, Beth, survived 53 days inside the home of the man who had once sat in Mary's classroom as her student. For nearly 2 months, they were hidden from the world, trapped in a nightmare built out of obsession, control, and silence. But when Mary finally escaped and called for help, the case did not end with her rescue, because there was another child. 6-year-old Jason Wilkman had not been part of the plan. He had not known Mary. He had not known Beth. He was simply a little boy who came across the wrong car at the worst possible moment. And once he saw what was inside the trunk, Ming Sen Shiue made sure Jason would never go home. This is the story of Mary and Beth Stauffer's survival. But it is also the story of Jason Wilkman, the child who became a witness by accident and a victim because of it. What makes this case so difficult to sit with is not only the length of the captivity or the violence behind it.
We didn't know from minute to minute whether we would be alive the next minute.
It is the way one man's obsession reached beyond his intended victims and destroyed a child who had nothing to do with it. Mary and Beth Stauffer were targeted. Jason Wilkman was not. He was not part of a plan, not part of a grudge, not part of some old fixation that had been growing in the dark for years. He was 6 years old. He was outside, playing, living an ordinary day. And that is what gives this case its deepest wound. Because Mary and Beth's survival is extraordinary. It is a story of courage, instinct, and a mother refusing to give up. But Jason's death is the reminder that in crimes driven by obsession, the danger does not always stop with the person being targeted. Sometimes, it reaches anyone close enough to see the truth. Before this became a case file, before their names were attached to court records and headlines, Mary and Beth Stauffer were simply a mother and daughter standing at the edge of a major change in their lives. Mary Stauffer was 36 years old. She was a wife, a mother, and a teacher, the kind of person whose life was built around responsibility, faith, and the people depending on her. At the time, Mary and her family were preparing to leave Minnesota for the Philippines, where they planned to begin missionary work. It was supposed to be the start of a new chapter, one shaped by purpose and service. But Mary was also connected to the man who would destroy that ordinary sense of safety. Years earlier, Ming Sen Shiue had been one of her students. To Mary, he may have been just another name from a classroom, long in the past. To him, she had become something else entirely, the center of an obsession that had been growing quietly, dangerously, and far beyond anything she could have known. Beth Stauffer was only 8 years old. She was still a child, still moving through the world with the trust children are supposed to have. On that day, she was not facing danger alone from a distance. She was taken with her mother. She saw the fear. She felt the control. And for 53 days, she was forced to survive inside a nightmare no child should ever have to understand. Then there was Jason Wilkman. Jason was 6 years old. He was not connected to Mary's past. He was not connected to Shiue's obsession. He was not someone the attacker had planned for. Jason was a little boy outside on an ordinary day, close enough to stumble across something he was never meant to see. That is what makes his place in this story so devastating. Mary and Beth were targeted. Jason was accidental, but once he became a witness, he became part of the crime, not because of anything he did, but because of what he saw. So, this is not only the story of a mother and daughter who endured the unimaginable and lived. It is also the story of a little boy whose life was cut short because he happened to be near the truth. 3 victims entered this case in different ways. Only 2 came home. To understand why Mary Stauffer was targeted, the story has to move backward, not far enough to excuse anything, but far enough to see the pattern. Ming Sen Shiue had once been one of Mary's 9th grade math students at Alexander Ramsey High School in Roseville, Minnesota. In the classroom, the connection was ordinary. A teacher, a student, a school year that should have ended and stayed in the past. But for Shiue, it did not stay there. Years after Mary had moved on with her life, he had not moved on from her. What should have been a distant memory hardened into fixation. And that is one of the most disturbing parts of this case. Mary was not chosen because of something she did that day. She was chosen because, in Shiue's mind, she had never stopped belonging to a story he had created around her. By 1980, Mary was living a full life outside that old classroom. She had a husband, children, faith, work, and plans. Her family was preparing to leave the United States for missionary work in the Philippines. That move should have marked a beginning. Instead, it became part of the pressure surrounding the crime. Because Shiue knew Mary's life was moving forward, away from Minnesota, away from his reach, and away from whatever fantasy he had built. That is why the danger in this case did not arrive suddenly in the Salon parking lot. The parking lot was only where the hidden obsession became visible, and cases like this force an uncomfortable truth. Obsession often looks quiet before it becomes violent. It can hide behind memory. It can disguise itself as longing, resentment, or unfinished business. But when a person begins treating another human being as something they are entitled to possess, the threat has already crossed a line. Mary did not know she was walking into a trap built from years of fixation. Beth did not know that a normal outing with her mother would become a memory she would carry for the rest of her life. Jason Wilkman did not know that he was about to step into a crime already in motion. On the 16th of May, 1980, all of those separate lives converged. And once they did, there was no going back. The 16th of May, 1980, began like a normal day. Mary Stauffer and her 8-year-old daughter, Beth, went to a beauty salon in Roseville, Minnesota. It was the kind of ordinary errand that should have left no mark on anyone's memory. A mother and daughter, a parking lot, a routine stop before the next part of the day. But Ming Sen Shiue had already placed himself inside that ordinary moment. When Mary and Beth came out of the salon, he was waiting. According to court records, Shiue approached them with a gun and forced them into the car. In seconds, the world narrowed. There was no time for Mary to reason with him. No time to protect Beth from understanding what was happening. One moment, they were leaving a salon. The next, they were under the control of a man Mary had once known only as a former student. Shiue drove them away from the public space and toward a more isolated area. The danger had moved from visible to hidden. That shift mattered. In the parking lot, there had been people nearby, businesses nearby, the possibility that someone might notice something wrong. But once the car left, Mary and Beth were cut off from that safety. At some point, Shiue stopped the vehicle. Mary and Beth were bound. They were gagged. Then they were placed inside the trunk. That detail changes the feeling of the timeline completely. They were no longer just being transported. They had been concealed. Their voices had been taken from them. Their bodies had been folded into a space where no one passing by could see them, hear them, or know that a mother and child were fighting to stay alive only inches away from the outside world. And then the case took its most devastating turn. 6-year-old Jason Wilkman appeared. Jason was not part of Shiue's plan. He was not connected to Mary's past, and he had no reason to understand the danger unfolding in front of him. He was a child outside on a spring day, close enough to come across the car, close enough to see something that should never have been his burden to witness. For Mary and Beth, still trapped in the trunk, Jason's arrival must have created a terrible mixture of hope and fear. Hope, because another person had found them. Fear, because that person was only a little boy. Shiue could have fled. He could have abandoned the plan. He could have let Jason run home. Instead, he pulled Jason into the crime. Court records would later show that Jason was forced into the trunk with Mary and Beth. For a brief, horrifying period, all 3 victims were confined together, a mother, her daughter, and a 6-year-old boy who had simply walked into the wrong moment. Then, Shiue drove again. The timeline becomes darker here because Mary and Beth could not see everything. They could only hear, feel, and wait. At one point, the car stopped. Jason was taken out. Beth would later describe seeing Shiue with a long, bent metal object. Jason never returned to the trunk. From that point forward, Mary and Beth were still alive, but the case had changed forever. It was no longer only a kidnapping. It was no longer only the story of a stalker finally acting on obsession. By the end of that day, Mary and Beth had disappeared, and Jason Wilkman was gone. There are moments in a case where everything before it still leaves room for survival. The victim is missing, but alive. The danger is real, but not final. The crime is already terrifying, but there is still a path, however narrow, back to safety. For Mary and Beth Stauffer, that path still existed inside the trunk of Ming Sen Shiue's car. They were bound, they were gagged, they were hidden from anyone who might pass by. But they were alive. Mary was still with her daughter. Beth was still close enough to her mother to know she was not alone, and even in that darkness, there was still the faint possibility that someone might find them before Shiue could take the crime any further. Then Jason Wilkman appeared. Jason's arrival should have been the interruption that stopped everything. He was 6 years old. He had no weapon, no power, no understanding of the violence already unfolding. He was just a child who happened to come near the car at the exact wrong time. But to Shiue, Jason was not treated like a child. He was treated like a problem. Once Jason saw what was happening, Shiue had a choice. He could abandon the abduction. He could run. He could leave Mary and Beth where they were and try to escape the consequences. He could have let Jason go home. Instead, he pulled a 6-year-old boy into the trunk with them. For a short time, Jason was trapped beside Mary and Beth in the same dark space. It is difficult to imagine the fear inside that car without turning the moment into something unbearable. Mary could not protect her own daughter. Beth could not understand why this was happening. And now, another child was inside the crime with them, frightened and helpless because he had seen too much. That was the point where the case crossed into something even darker. Shiue drove again. Mary and Beth could not see where they were going. Their world had been reduced to sound, movement, heat, breath, and fear. Every stop carried a new possibility. Every sound outside the trunk could mean rescue or something worse. Eventually, the car stopped. Jason was taken out. Mary and Beth remained trapped, unable to intervene, unable to run, unable to save him. They could only listen and wait in a darkness that had already become its own kind of torture. Later, the truth would come out in court. Jason Wilkman had been killed. The boy who stumbled across the trunk never made it home. His death transformed the case from a targeted abduction into a murder case, and it revealed the full cruelty of what Shiue was willing to do to keep control. That is what makes this part of the story so devastating. Jason was not chosen because of obsession. He was not part of a plan years in the making. He became a victim because he witnessed another crime. Mary and Beth would survive what came next. Jason would not. And from that moment on, every hour Mary and Beth remained alive carried another weight. They were not only surviving for themselves anymore. They were the only living witnesses to what had happened to him. What came next was not a single moment. It was time. Hours became days. Days became weeks. And for Mary and Beth Stauffer, the outside world slowly became something they could only imagine. After the abduction, Shiue brought Mary and Beth to his home in Roseville. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary house on an ordinary street. Cars passed. Neighbors lived nearby. Life continued around it with no clear sign that a mother and child were hidden inside. That is one of the most unsettling parts of this case. Mary and Beth were not taken to some faraway place where no one could have found them. They were kept close to everyday life, close to streets, homes, routines, and people who had no idea what was happening behind those walls. Inside, their world became extremely small. For much of their captivity, Mary and Beth were kept in a closet-like space. It was cramped, controlled, and separated from the life happening beyond the door. There was no normal rhythm anymore. No school for Beth. No family meals. No sunlight marking the day in a natural way. No ordinary conversation that did not carry fear underneath it. For Beth, who was only 8 years old, this was a childhood moment no child should ever have had to understand. She was old enough to know that something was terribly wrong, but still young enough to need her mother for every ounce of reassurance. And Mary had to become more than a mother in those days. She had to become the calm voice, the protector, the observer, and the person quietly searching for a way out. That is where Mary's strength in this story becomes impossible to miss. Survival did not look dramatic every minute. It looked quiet. It looked like paying attention when it would have been easier to shut down. It looked like studying small details, remembering sounds, noticing routines, and holding on to any piece of information that might matter later. Mary had to manage fear without letting it consume her. She had to comfort Beth without making promises she could not control. She had to stay alert without knowing when, or if, an opportunity would come. And all the while, the world outside was searching. Mary's family did not know where she was. Beth's loved ones did not know if they would see her again. And somewhere else, Jason Wilkman's family was facing their own impossible silence. 3 people had vanished from ordinary places on an ordinary day, and no one yet understood exactly how those disappearances connected. That split between inside and outside gives this part of the story its tension. Inside the house, Mary and Beth were trying to survive the next hour. Outside the house, families and investigators were trying to understand a case that still had too many missing pieces. And between those two worlds was Shiue, controlling what Mary and Beth could know, what they could say, and when they could move. But control is not the same as certainty. Over time, Mary began to collect small fragments of possibility. A sound, a movement, a detail on an object, a sense of how the house worked, a sense of when Shiue was nearby and when he was not. Nothing was wasted. Every detail became part of a quiet map. There is a particular kind of courage in waiting without surrendering. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It happens in silence, in calculation, in the decision to keep thinking when fear is trying to take over everything. Mary had Beth beside her, and that mattered. Her daughter's presence gave the captivity another layer of terror, but also another reason to keep going. Mary was not only trying to live, she was trying to bring her child home. Beth, in turn, had Mary. In a place designed to make them feel powerless, that bond was one thing Shiue could not fully take from them. He could reduce their space. He could limit their movement. He could try to make the world feel unreachable, but he could not make Mary stop being Beth's mother. 53 days is a long time to be missing. It is long enough for hope to rise and collapse over and over again. Long enough for families to replay the final known moments until every detail feels unbearable. Long enough for investigators to follow leads, lose them, and start again. For Mary and Beth, it was long enough for survival to become routine. Not safe, not normal, but routine. They learned the shape of each day. They learned when to stay still, when to listen, when to speak carefully, and when to hold back. They learned how to endure a life reduced to waiting. But Mary was not only waiting, she was watching. And that is what Shiue underestimated. He believed that by hiding Mary and Beth away, he had removed their power. But Mary's power did not come from force. It came from patience, memory, and the refusal to let fear erase her ability to think. Somewhere inside that house, as the days stretched on, the first pieces of an escape began to form. Not all at once, not loudly, but quietly, in Mary's mind. Because even in captivity, she was still looking for the door. While Mary and Beth were being held inside Shiue's house, the world outside was trying to make sense of their absence. At first, disappearance creates confusion before it creates certainty. People ask the practical questions first. Did they stop somewhere? Did they change plans? Was there a misunderstanding? Was there an errand no one knew about? But Mary Stauffer was not someone who would simply vanish with her 8-year-old daughter and leave her family in silence. Beth was not a child who could disappear without someone noticing immediately. And as the hours stretched on, ordinary explanations began to collapse. Concern turned into fear. Mary and Beth had left for what should have been a routine outing, a salon appointment, a normal part of an ordinary day, but they did not come home. There was no simple message, no clear reason, no safe explanation that could make the silence feel less threatening. For Mary's family, the waiting must have been unbearable. Every hour without contact would have carried a different kind of panic. There is the panic of not knowing where someone is. And then there is the deeper panic of realizing that the person missing would have called if she could. That distinction matters. Families often know, before evidence confirms it. They know when a silence is out of character. They know when a delay does not fit the person they love. And in this case, Mary was missing with her child. That made every possible answer more frightening. Then there was Jason Wilkman. Jason's disappearance created a second circle of panic. He was 6 years old, too young for anyone to comfortably explain away his absence. A missing adult can sometimes be misunderstood at first. A missing child changes the atmosphere immediately. His family was not looking at an empty chair and thinking he might simply come back later. They were facing the kind of silence that grows heavier with every passing minute. At that stage, the outside world did not yet understand the connection between Mary, Beth, and Jason. That is what makes the early reaction so haunting. Two families were living through the same nightmare, but they did not yet know their grief and fear had been created by the same man. One family was searching for a mother and daughter. Another family was searching for a little boy. And somewhere nearby, Mary and Beth were still alive, hidden inside a house that did not look like a crime scene from the street. That is the terrible contradiction at the center of this part of the case. Mary and Beth were not beyond reach in some distant wilderness. They were close to normal life. Close to roads, close to neighbors, close to the ordinary movements of a community that had no idea a mother and child were waiting behind closed walls. Outside, investigators had to begin with fragments. Last known movements, places visited, people connected to Mary, possible witnesses, possible vehicles, possible explanations. But the case did not yet have the one thing every investigation needs most: a clear direction. Inside the house, Mary had no way to know how much the outside world understood. She did not know what police had found. She did not know whether Jason had been connected to her disappearance. She did not know whether anyone was close. All she could do was keep Beth steady and keep watching. That separation between those searching and those waiting to be found is what gives the middle of this case its weight. Everyone was moving through the same story, but no one had the full picture. Families were asking where their loved ones had gone. Investigators were trying to follow a trail that had been deliberately hidden. Mary and Beth were alive, but unable to tell anyone where they were. And Jason could no longer speak for himself. His absence was not just another missing person question. It was the warning no one could fully read yet. A child had vanished, and the truth of what happened to him was locked inside the same crime that had taken Mary and Beth. For 53 days, the search existed beside the captivity. One side was made of phone calls, questions, fear, and unfinished leads. The other side was made of silence, endurance, and a mother quietly refusing to give up. And as each day passed, the pressure grew. Because the longer Mary and Beth remained missing, the more impossible it became for their families to imagine a safe ending. But inside that house, Mary was still alive, Beth was still alive, and Mary was still looking for the moment when fear would have to become action. Investigators had to begin with absence. Mary and Beth Stauffer were gone. Jason Wilkman was gone. At first, those disappearances may have looked like separate emergencies, each one terrifying on its own. A mother and daughter missing after a normal outing. A 6-year-old boy missing from an ordinary day outside. But the truth was that both disappearances belonged to the same hidden timeline. The difficulty was that investigators did not know that yet. In the early stage of the case, there was no confession, no clear location, and no rescued witness who could explain what had happened. Mary and Beth were alive, but they were unreachable. Jason had vanished, and the people searching for him did not yet have the full story. The investigation had to build itself from fragments, where each person had last been seen, who might have had access, what vehicles were noticed, and whether any connection existed between the missing mother, the missing daughter, and the missing child. The first major question was simple but urgent. Was Mary targeted, or had she and Beth crossed paths with a stranger? That question changed the direction of everything. Mary was not someone living on the edge of danger. She was a teacher, a mother, and a woman preparing for a major move with her family. Nothing about her public life suggested that she would disappear voluntarily or place her child at risk. So investigators had to look closer at the people connected to her past. That path eventually led to Ming Sen Shiue. Shiue was not a random name. He had been Mary's student years earlier. To most people, that connection would have meant very little. A former teacher, a former classroom, a year long over. But in this case, that old connection mattered. It suggested that Mary may not have been selected by chance. She may have been selected because Shiue had held on to a fixation long after Mary had moved on with her life. That was the first investigative shift. The case was no longer just about where Mary and Beth were. It became about who had wanted Mary badly enough to take her. But even with suspicion moving in the right direction, investigators still faced the same central problem. Mary and Beth were hidden. They could not call. They could not tell police where they were. They could not explain that Jason had been pulled into the same crime. That meant the investigation had to continue in the dark. Every lead mattered. Every hour mattered. But the person who knew the most was trapped inside the suspect's home, quietly gathering details that would later become critical. Mary was not an investigator by profession. But during those 53 days, she became one in the only way available to her. She watched, she listened, she remembered. She looked for patterns in Shiue's routine. She studied what was around her. She held onto small pieces of information, because small pieces were all she had. The investigation outside was searching for Mary. Inside the house, Mary was building the path back to them. That is what makes the eventual break in this case so powerful. It did not come from one dramatic discovery made from the outside. It came because Mary survived long enough, stayed aware enough, and found the right moment to act. When that moment finally arrived, Mary used what she had learned. She managed to free herself and Beth from the space where they had been kept. But escaping the room was only the first part. They still needed help. They still needed police to understand where they were. And Mary had one vital piece of information, an address connected to the house. That detail became the bridge between captivity and rescue. Mary called the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office. In that call, she was not only asking for help, she was giving investigators the location they had been missing for nearly 2 months. The response came quickly. Police arrived at the house. Mary and Beth were found alive. After 53 days of uncertainty, the search for them finally had an answer. But the rescue did not close the case. It opened the next part of it. Because once Mary and Beth were safe enough to speak, investigators could finally connect the missing pieces. They could place Jason Wilkman inside the same sequence of events. They could understand that the little boy's disappearance was not separate. He had encountered the crime while it was already happening. Mary and Beth's account gave investigators what they had been missing: a living timeline from inside the abduction. They could explain the parking lot, the car, the trunk, Jason's sudden appearance, the moment he was taken into the same space with them, and then the moment he was removed and did not return. From there, the investigation changed again. It was no longer only a search for missing people. It was a case against Ming Sen Shiue. Investigators now had surviving witnesses. They had a location. They had a timeline. They had the connection between Mary and Shiue. They had the circumstances that tied Jason to the abduction. And they had the beginning of a legal case that would move through both federal and state court. The evidence did not need to create mystery anymore. It had to establish sequence. Who took Mary and Beth? Where were they taken? How long were they held? How did Jason enter the story? What happened after he saw them? What did Mary and Beth hear, see, and remember? What did the physical evidence support? Piece by piece, the case became clearer. The beauty salon was no longer just the place Mary and Beth were last seen. It was the starting point of a targeted abduction. Shiue's home was no longer just an ordinary house in Roseville. It was where a mother and daughter had been kept hidden while people searched for them. Jason's disappearance was no longer an isolated mystery. It was the consequence of a child stumbling into the path of an active crime, and Mary's escape was no longer only a moment of survival. It became the breakthrough that allowed the entire investigation to move forward. For 53 days, investigators had been trying to find the truth from the outside. Mary brought it out with her. The break in the case did not come because Shiue let his guard down completely. It came because Mary Stauffer had never stopped watching. For 53 days, she had lived inside a space designed to make her feel powerless. She had been separated from the outside world, kept away from her family, and forced to protect Beth under conditions no mother should ever have to endure. But even in that fear, Mary kept collecting details. She noticed what she could. She remembered what mattered. She waited for the smallest opening, and eventually, that opening came. Inside Shiue's house, Mary found a way to get herself and Beth free from the area where they had been kept. It was not the kind of escape that happens all at once. It was not clean, easy, or certain. It was the result of patience, timing, and a mother understanding that if she hesitated too long, the chance might never come again. Every second mattered. Mary had to move carefully enough not to lose the opportunity, but quickly enough to turn it into survival. Beth was with her. That meant Mary was not only escaping for herself, every decision carried the weight of her daughter's life too. After nearly 2 months of confinement, the world outside must have felt almost unreal. A phone, a voice, the possibility of being heard. These ordinary things had become distant, almost unreachable. But when Mary finally reached help, she did not collapse into confusion. She gave police what they needed. She called the Ramsey County Sheriff's Office and provided the address connected to the house. One detail, something small enough that Shiue may have believed it meant nothing, became the key that brought law enforcement to the door. That is what he underestimated. He had controlled the space around Mary and Beth, but he had not erased Mary's ability to think. He had not stopped her from observing. He had not taken away the part of her that was still silently building a route back to safety. Police responded quickly. After 53 days, Mary and Beth were found alive. For their family, it was the answer they had been praying for. The impossible silence finally broke. A mother and daughter who had vanished from a normal day were no longer missing. They had come back from a place no one could fully imagine. But the rescue was not the ending. It was the beginning of the reveal. Because once Mary and Beth were safe enough to speak, the case changed shape. Investigators could finally hear the story from inside the crime. They could trace the path from the Salon parking lot to the secluded stop, from the trunk to Shiue's house, from the first moment of control to the long weeks of captivity. And they could finally understand where Jason Wilkman fit. Jason had not disappeared in a separate mystery. He had crossed paths with the same crime. He had come upon the car while Mary and Beth were hidden inside. He had seen something he was never supposed to see. And because of that, he became part of the evidence Mary and Beth carried out with them. That is the painful truth at the center of this reveal. Mary's escape saved 2 lives. It also exposed the loss of a third. For the Stauffer family, the rescue meant survival. For Jason's family, it brought the confirmation that their little boy's disappearance had been tied to something far darker than anyone first understood. That contrast makes this moment almost impossible to hold in one emotion. There was relief, there was gratitude, there was the overwhelming fact that Mary and Beth were alive. But there was also Jason, the little boy who had been outside on an ordinary day, the child who had no connection to Shiue's obsession, the witness who never got to tell anyone what he had seen. After Mary and Beth were rescued, Shiue was arrested. The hidden crime was no longer hidden. The man who had tried to control the story had lost the one thing he depended on most: silence. Mary and Beth could speak. They could name him. They could describe what happened. They could place Jason inside the timeline. And from that point forward, the investigation was no longer searching blindly. It had survivors. It had a location. It had a sequence. It had the beginning of a case that would move into court and force the truth into public view. The reveal was not only that Mary and Beth had been alive inside that house. It was that Jason Wilkman's disappearance had always been part of the same nightmare. Mary and Beth came home. Jason did not. And that is why this case can never be told as survival alone. Eventually, the story moved from the hidden rooms of Shiue's house into the public record. What had happened to Mary Stauffer, Beth Stauffer, and Jason Wilkman could no longer be controlled by silence. It now had to be examined in court, piece by piece, through testimony, evidence, and legal findings. Shiue faced federal charges connected to the kidnapping of Mary and Beth. The case showed that this was not a brief or accidental crime. It involved planning, movement, control, and a prolonged period in which a mother and child were kept from the world. The federal court process ended with Shiue being convicted for the kidnapping and transportation of Mary and Beth. But the legal story did not end there, because Jason Wilkman's death belonged to a separate and devastating part of the case. In Minnesota State Court, Shiue was tried for Jason's kidnapping and murder. This was the part of the prosecution that forced the court to confront what had happened after Jason came upon the car and became a witness to the crime already unfolding. Mary's testimony became critical. She was not only a survivor, she was one of the people who could place Jason inside the timeline. She could tell the court that Jason had been there, that he had been pulled into the same nightmare, and that he had not returned. And then, even inside the courtroom, Shiue tried to reach her again. During the state trial, while Mary was on the witness stand, Shiue attacked her. It was a shocking moment, not because it changed who he was, but because it revealed that even surrounded by court officers, lawyers, and a judge, he was still trying to exert control over the woman he had targeted. Mary survived that moment too. The trial continued. In the end, Shiue was convicted in connection with Jason Wilkman's kidnapping and murder. The court sentenced him to 40 years in state prison, with that sentence running alongside the federal sentence he had already received. Legally, the system had finally named what happened. Mary and Beth had been kidnapped. Jason had been taken and killed. Shiue was responsible. But a conviction does not restore what was stolen. It did not give Mary back the weeks she and Beth spent hidden from the world. It did not erase what Beth had been forced to live through as a child. And it did not bring Jason Wilkman home to the family that had searched for him, waited for him, and then had to learn why he never returned. Years later, the courts would still be dealing with the question of Shiue's future. Even after his criminal sentences, authorities pursued civil commitment to keep him confined under Minnesota's sex offender program if he were ever released from federal custody. That later ruling showed how deeply the danger was still understood. The courtroom gave the case its legal ending, but for Mary, Beth, Jason, and the families left behind, the emotional ending was never that simple. This case ended in court, but it did not end in any simple human way. Mary Stauffer survived. Beth survived. That fact matters deeply. It matters because survival was not guaranteed, and it did not happen by chance. Mary stayed alert in a place designed to make her feel powerless. She protected her daughter as best she could. She watched, remembered, waited, and when the moment finally came, she acted. But survival does not mean the damage disappears. Mary and Beth came home carrying a story no one should have to live through. They returned to their family, but they did not return to the same world they had left on the 16th of May, 1980. A normal errand had become the beginning of 53 days of fear, silence, and endurance. Beth was only 8 years old. Mary was a mother trying to keep both of them alive, and every part of what happened after that day would remain part of their lives. Then, there was Jason Wilkman. Jason did not survive. He did not have years to explain what he saw, to grow beyond the worst day of his childhood, or to become anything more than the 6-year-old boy his family lost. He had no connection to Shiue's fixation. He had not been part of the plan. He simply came across the truth at the wrong moment. And that is why Jason has to remain at the center of how this story is remembered. Because this was not only a case about obsession, it was a case about how obsession can spread outward, reaching people who were never the intended targets. Mary was the focus of Shiue's fixation. Beth was taken because she was with her mother. Jason was taken because he saw too much. 3 victims entered the story from 3 different places. Only 2 came home. The lesson here is not that people should live in fear of every stranger, every memory, or every old connection. The lesson is more specific than that. Fixation becomes dangerous when one person begins to believe they have a right to another person's life, attention, body, future, or silence. When control replaces reality, the threat has already crossed a line. And sometimes, the people harmed are not only the ones being watched, they are the child nearby, the family waiting at home, the daughter standing beside her mother, the people pulled into the path of a danger they never saw coming. Mary and Beth's survival deserves to be remembered as courage. Jason's death deserves to be remembered as a life stolen, not a footnote to someone else's survival story. The courtroom gave the case a legal ending, but emotionally, the ending belongs somewhere else. It belongs with Mary, who who kept thinking when fear could have taken everything. It belongs with Beth, who survived childhood's darkest interruption. And it belongs with Jason Wilkman, the little boy who should have gone home that day, who should have grown older, and whose name should never be left out of this story. Mary and Beth escaped. Jason did not. And that is the truth that makes this case impossible to forget.